Being 12 noon, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for OPD April Planning Lunches at Noon webinar. Congratulations, you're a board member now. What's next? My name is Noah Hodgetts. I'm a principal planner in the Office of Planning and Development at the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs, BEA. I'm joined by my colleague, OPD Principal Planner Brendan McDowell. And I see we do have a hand up. Due to the number of people on today's webinar, we are not able to unmute folks. So if you do have a question, please put it in the chat, and Brendan, Elvina, or I will do our best to try to answer that question. And my apologies for going back and forth looking back and forth at the screen. My notes are on the other screen and my camera is on my laptop. Just for a quick reminder, here's a reminder on how to use the Microsoft Teams webinar controls for anybody that may not have been on one of our webinars or used Microsoft Teams before. Please put your questions in the chat and we will do our best to answer them throughout the webinar. And if we have time, we'll answer additional questions at the end of the webinar. We do have a lot of content to get through today, and we are going to try to wrap up by 1 p.m. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague in BEA's Division of Planning and Community Development, Leanne Moynihan, to provide a quick update about the Housing Champion Designation and Grant Program. Leanne, take it away.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Noah, for giving me a chance to just speak just for a couple minutes about the Housing Champion Program. Many of you are probably familiar with the Housing Champion Program. We ran it last fall and achieved 18 designated communities. We are reopening, or we have reopened, the designation part of that program, and those applications are now due May 31st. So if you are unfamiliar with that, you can go to the website, which I'll put in the link, or maybe I'll be in a.
I'm going to do that right now, Leanne.
So okay, great. Thank you. So there'll be a link there for the Housing Champion Program, and that's a 3-year designation. We just completed our grant funding portion of the program, which awards are going out in the next week. So this is the designation portion, and that will be being awarded in June of 2025, June, July. So if anyone has any questions, please go to the website, or as always, you can contact me here with any questions on that second round of designation. Thanks, Noah.
Thank you so much, Leanne. So here is our kind of agenda for today's webinar. As I said, we have a lot to cover. We're going to start with a overview, intro to OPD, just a refresher, to talk about kind of the purpose of planning and zoning, and then we'll get into a little bit of the history of planning and zoning throughout the country and in New Hampshire. We'll go through kind of the basic planning and zoning and land use law statutes. And then we'll go into the responsibilities for planning boards and zoning boards, tips on how to be a good board member, kind of acronym of alphabet soup of planning and zoning. And then again, if we have more time for questions, we'll do that at the end. But again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation, and we will also kind of answer questions, write out answers, do our best to write out answers to questions in the chat. So just as kind of a background for folks, the Office of Planning and Development, OPD, is the state's planning office, and it was incorporated into the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, BEA, in July of 2021. In fall of 2024, so this past fall, BEA was restructured to create a new division of planning and community development, which includes OPD, the Invest New Hampshire Housing Program, the Housing Champions Program that Leanne just spoke about, and the Office of Broadband Initiatives. The division is led by Heather Shank, and our office, OPD, is still comprised of kind of 4 main programs, which Brendan and I are going to talk about in more detail now. The Municipal and Regional Assistance Program, the Floodplain Management Program, the State Data Center, which is our partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau, and the Geographic Information Systems GIS program. We will have this link throughout, but the main gateway to anything OPD related is nhopd.com. I'm seeing somebody saying that they can't see the screen, the slide. So if anybody else is having that problem, please put that in the chat. I suspect that a specific user having an issue. Again, if you're having that issue, please, I would recommend Xing out of Teams the link. Somebody else can't see the slides. So again, I would try going out and then logging back in. All right, so a couple people having problems seeing the slides. I still think it's a specific user issue. And Alvina just put the link to the slides again. For some reason, you can't pull it up. You can pull up the PDF and follow along in the PDF. So before we get into kind of the Municipal and Regional Assistance Program, which is going to be the focus of today's webinar, our other kind of functions, as I said, of OPD are the state data center, which tracks population and housing development, including every January we put out a report called Current Trends in New Hampshire's Housing Supply, which summarizes residential building permit survey. We just released the 2024 report this past January, which summarizes residential building permit activity through 2023. Alvina, if you can actually have that link handy, that would be great. If you can put that in the chat. We also have the GIS program, the Geographic Information Systems program, which maintains and creates GIS data for several state agencies and works with UNH Granite. And then finally, we have our floodplain management program, which is we are the state coordinator for the FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, and we assist municipalities with floodplain regulations and floodplain map updates as updated by FEMA. We also provide education and technical assistance. And just for folks, we are on slide 7 that are having trouble viewing the slides. Alvina, no need. I don't think you need to keep putting the slide numbers for each in the chat. It's just going to bog down the chat. But Brendan and I will try to do our best to just kind of state what slide number we are on for folks that are going through the PDF. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brendan to talk a little bit about the Regional Planning and Assistance Program.
All right, moving on to slide 8. So Noah, Alvina, and I work mostly in the Municipal and Regional Assistance Program, MRA. We provide technical and administrative assistance to municipalities statewide. So providing technical assistance on planning, zoning, land use, and housing issues, land use board processes, and other topics. We respond to 300 plus inquiries annually. We also conduct annual updates to OPD, that's us, Office of Planning and Development, Planning Board and Zoning Board of Adjustment handbooks based on statute changes. We conduct an annual survey to municipalities regarding updates to their land use regulations and maintenance of a central file of local land use regulations pursuant to RSA 675-9. We administer the Targeted Block Grants, TBG, program to the 9 regional planning commissions, the RPCs. We provide training for planning and zoning board members on procedures and statute changes per RSA 673-3A. And we coordinate planning initiatives across the state agencies and with planning partners. So moving on to 9, as new board members, you are encouraged to participate in the training materials and webinars outlined in RSA 673-3A, either through our office or other organizations like the RPCs, and materials that provide training assistance. So the law was amended in 2022 and now says, in part, the Office of Planning and Development shall develop standard self-training materials and corresponding tests for zoning boards zoning boards of adjustment and planning boards free of charge. So moving on to slide 10. So as a result of the 2022 legislative changes for tests, OPD created testing for planning and zoning boards. These tests are based on the planning and zoning handbooks. There are 2 completion options with or without a certificate. So for the planning board handbooks, the optional test and certificate, so there's a 30-question planning board test that was developed as an optional learning check based on the information contained in current planning board handbook published by us, OPD. Individuals have the option to receive an email certificate showing that they passed the test by receiving a score of 75 or 65% or higher. And to receive a certificate, individuals are required to submit their name and email address, and the test is located on the planning board handbook website of the OPD website at the links that are linked here in the slides. So on this slide, you'll see the links to the tests. There is no limit on how many times you can take the test, and just a disclaimer, we do not share your email addresses out. So this slide has the links to the zoning board test, or zoning board, as well as the zoning board handbook tests. So this is essentially the same slide as the one previously, just for zoning boards. We update the testing questions every year according to the changes made to the books and swap them out too, so you can take the test every year. And these are kind of a list of the different resources that we offer, and we're going to go into these in a lot more detail, but these are all of the links. If you're following along on your own slides, you can click into these links, or if you want to look at the, use this webinar later on, you've got all those slides available to you. So I would recommend that all new land use board members obtain a copy of the planning and zoning board handbooks. They are available in digital format only, so they have been downloaded, and so you can download them and print them out. They are updated annually based on statute changes, and if we find any kind of housekeeping issues that need to be updated. So this is kind of a more detailed look. This is the organization of these handbooks, just as an example. And something we started in 2023 was a federal and state planning and zoning case law for New Hampshire local officials. This is where you would find relevant court cases decided by the United States Supreme Court, as well as our own Supreme Court, the New Hampshire Supreme Court. We will be updated. This will be updated annually along with the handbooks. Please remember that these are summaries only. For a complete copy of the case, please review the full decision. And here's a link to each individual publication on slide 16. And I'm going to pass it back to Noah.
Great. Thank you so much, Brendan. So the next resource we're going to talk about is our Planning Lunches at Noon Plan monthly webinar series, which is what this is right now. We hold a monthly webinar, typically on the third Thursday of the month at 12 noon. We will, so this slide shows the link, some of our past recent webinars, just for folks that might be keeping track coming up. We are going to skip May because of our annual conference, which I will talk about. I think it is actually the next slide. And then the June plan webinar, I don't have the calendar date in front of me, but I believe it is actually going to be a month earlier. I mean, a week earlier because, yes. So I think for scheduling conflicts, that's actually going to be Thursday, June 5th instead of, I'm sorry, Thursday, June 12th instead of Thursday, June 19th. But we will send out additional information about that as we get closer to that date. Now I'm going to talk a little bit briefly, as I just mentioned. OPD has done an annual spring planning and zoning conference for, I believe, now going on. This is our 31st conference coming up on Saturday, May 10th. For various reasons, for the last 5 years, we've been doing this conference. We used to do it in person. We've been doing it virtually on Microsoft Teams. There's going to be 3 tracks again this year: the planning board track, the zoning board track, and the historic preservation and housing track. It's free. There's a link here, and there's a link earlier under that resource page. Folks should have received at least one email at this point about the conference to register. We just ask that you register for one track, the planning board, zoning board, or historic preservation housing track, and not multiple tracks. We will be recording all sessions, and we will send out the link for all 3 tracks to anybody that registers for any of the 3 tracks. And here's the schedule. I'm not going to go through it in detail of these kind of session breakdown for the conference. Here is, again, just kind of so you can see what's on our website and the links for the earlier slide, our planning and zoning resource library to materials on a range of different planning and zoning topics, including everything from housing and historic preservation and agriculture, farmland, to kind of general planning tools, details on different types of land use regulations, and processes about site plan review, subdivision, and zoning. Here's some other kind of more technical bulletins that our office has put out, including about development of regional impact, DRI, planning for accessory dwelling units, master planning in New Hampshire, tax increment financing, and the state development plan. And now I'm going to talk really briefly about another great resource, which our office developed in collaboration with the 9 regional planning commissions, going on 2.5 years ago now, the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox, which is a great tool of 20 planning and zoning strategies for communities that are interested in increasing housing production in their community. It's sorted in different categories. You can kind of filter the tools by kind of what kind of housing issue you're seeking to tackle. Specifically, again, that link is a couple slides back. The next resource I'm going to highlight is our Municipal Land Use Regulation Survey. This is our annual survey as Brendan touched on, in accordance with RSA 675:9. Every municipality is required to send our office any updates or amendments to their zoning ordinance or other land use regulations, including site plan review and subdivision regulations, excavation regulations, as well as updates to their master plan. As part of kind of being that statewide repository under 675-9, every year our office updates our municipal land use regulation survey. We've released our 2023 results at the end of last summer. I believe it was end of August, September. We're currently in the process of, for municipal folks, land use officials, town planners out there, you should have a request from our office to verify the information for our 2024 municipal land use regulation survey and report any changes to our office by June 1st of this year. We're also in the process of collecting 2025 zoning amendment results right now as we speak. And there's a lot of different reasons we've collected and displayed this information from the Municipal Land Use Regulation Survey in a lot of different formats. There's a community by community snapshot. If you want to just look up information for your community, there's an interactive map. There's downloadable tables summarizing data by topic. There's a kind of summary article. So a lot of different great information and resources to dig into there. And we update that annually. The next resource I want to talk about is planning and zoning legislation. Um, our office both tracks planning and zoning legislation throughout the legislative process, um, as well as uh, has been working in the last few years, has worked with New Hampshire Municipal Association, NHMA, on putting out a joint advisory at the end of each legislative session. Usually comes out in the late summer, early fall, on how to implement kind of all the planning and zoning statute changes once these statutes actually get changed. So again, the link to the planning and zoning legislation page is earlier, but this is kind of what that page looks like. I realize I'm going really quick here. I will just say on the legislation, I'm sure folks are well aware there's a lot of legislation in the planning and zoning space that the legislator is currently kind of contemplating. Um, as part of what Brenda mentioned earlier about taking technical assistance inquiries on planning and zoning and land use topics, if you have a question about any piece of planning and zoning legislation, kind of specifics, kind of how the mechanics work, want to kind of our thoughts on kind of implementation, what have you, feel free to email our office at planning@livefree.nh.gov. And here's just an example of what last year's guide looked like that we worked on with New Hampshire Municipal Association with NHMA, a guide, changes to planning zoning laws in 2024 guide for municipalities. There's a link here to download that 2024 guide. I think probably as many folks know on today's webinar, NHMA also provides a lot of great training and technical assistance. And every community in the state is a member of NHMA. So there are resources for all planning and zoning board members and municipal planners on this call. Their resources should all be free and available to you. And we encourage you to check out their website as well. So that's kind of all of a very high-level overview of all of our different resources. I'm now going to turn it back to my colleague Brendan to talk a little bit about kind of planning versus zoning in New Hampshire, and we'll get kind of more into the weeds.
All right, so let's begin with what is zoning and what is planning. Often these terms are used interchangeably, separately, or combined together as one. I want to mention the slight differences and similarities in the two. So zoning is the legal process for regulating type, location, size, density, etc. of land uses through regulations and documents. Planning is the legal decision-making process in which communities' goals and objectives for deciding future uses of land are established through land use regulations and planning principles. So both zoning and planning regulations are community-based, meaning individual communities develop, create, and amend their own regulations to guide the future development of their communities. So the community decided they want to plan for the future development. In order to reach that goal, they adopted zoning and land use regulations for land use planning in their community. So both are considered the regulatory framework that control land uses by size, location, density, etc. So that's zoning, and then implementing goals of the community. So that's planning. Land use regulations, generally speaking, the zoning ordinance and the planning ordinance, i.e., subdivision and site plan regulations, are generally called land use regulations. The land use regulations are local ordinances the community agreed to adopt to meet the goals and objectives of the community, which include the planning regulations. The implementation of the goals of the community is based on the master plan, zoning ordinance, and the site plan and subdivision regulations are among the many the planning board is in charge of. So why do we have planning and zoning? So the foundation for planning and zoning is to promote health, safety, and general welfare of citizens and residents. This is the classic basis for modern zoning, and you'll see it repeated in the state laws as well as your local zoning ordinance, subdivision regulations, and site plan regulations, master plan, etc. Zoning, let's see, NHRSA 674:16 zoning grant of power for the purpose of promoting the health, safety, or general welfare of the community. The local legislative body is authorized to adopt or amend a zoning ordinance. So I'll review zoning a little more in a moment. So this is further supported through land use regulations, most notably zoning ordinances, subdivision, which would be RSA 674:36, and site plan review regulations, RSA 674:43. And we're on slide 27 now for anybody who's still following along with the slides. So why do we have zoning? The starting point for the creation of municipal zoning comes from New York City in 1917. Construction of the Equitable Building is where it all started. So the building towered over the neighboring residences, completely covering all available land area within the property boundaries. It blocked windows of neighboring buildings. It reduced the sunlight availability, as well as circulation of air for people in the abutting and neighboring area, and revealed potential safety issues. So this triggered the creation and implementation of the city's first citywide zoning ordinance in the country. So more zoning followed. In 1926, the constitutionality of zoning was upheld in Village of Euclid, Ohio versus Amber Realty. Through this case, the U.S. Supreme Court established the legal principle and practice of municipalities separating land uses into zones. So the court decided and determined zoning is legal because the government has a valid interest to further the overall health, safety, and well-being of the community, which became Euclidean zoning. So how do we have planning? So the first examples of land use planning came from the system of land grants and westward expansion, first subdivisions of land, and design of cities. So Old Northwest, so Illinois, Ohio had a lot of grid systems, much different than what we have here out in the northeast. During the Industrial Revolution, planning by corporations and businesses began to create industrial communities. These industrial communities were laid out to include factories, commerce centers, employee housing, and recreation. A prime example of this is the birth of the mill cities, like our very own Manchester, Nashua, and Berlin, as examples. In, let's see, 1838, the Amoskeag Mills Company lays out plans for the Manchester City, which you can see here on the slide. And I'm going to pass this back to Noah here.
Great.
Slide 29.
Yeah, so yes, we're on slide 29 for folks following along on the PDF. And again, I'm apologize for me switching back and forth between screens here. So now that Brendan's kind of given the overview on planning and zoning, I'm going to go a little bit more detail into kind of the state statutes that kind of are the undertone kind of structure for how all municipal planning and zoning powers in New Hampshire. As Brendan talked about, kind of in terms of the first history of some of the mill cities in New Hampshire, Manchester, Nashua, and Berlin were kind of some of the first to adopt zoning, just kind of again, 20,000 foot view. Nationwide zoning began in 1916, New York City, and then in 1925, New Hampshire enacted kind of the Model Zoning Enabling Act, allowing New Hampshire municipalities to adopt zoning. The first communities in New Hampshire to quickly adopt and implement zoning were Keene in 1926, Manchester in 1927, and then Nashua and Portsmouth between 1927 and 1930, and then soon followed by Concord in 1930. Generally, when we're talking about the grant of power, we are referring to RSA, the grant of power for zoning. We are referring to RSA 674:16, which means the legislator gave municipalities, each of the 234 municipalities, cities, and towns throughout New Hampshire, the choice to adopt zoning in their community for the purpose of promoting the health, safety, or general welfare of the community. The local legislative body of any city or town or county in which there are located unincorporated towns or unincorporated places, that's a reference to Coas County, really, is authorized to adopt or amend a zoning ordinance under the ordinance enactment procedures of RSA 675:2 through 5. And then the zoning ordinance, I'm not going to go through everything here, but is designed to regulate and restrict height, number of stories, and size of buildings and other structures, lot size, percentage of a lot, so lot coverage that may be occupied, and the size of yards, courts, and other open spaces, the density of the population of the municipality, and location of use of buildings and structures. There's a lot more in RSA 674:16. I'm not going to go through it right now. This is kind of 674:16, though, is kind of when people talk about local control and the local power to zone, it comes from RSA, it comes from 674:16, which provides for kind of that power to kind of regulate development by each individual municipality. I already talked about that. And then kind of generally speaking, I've also included here a link to, as I'll go over in a minute, all the planning and zoning statutes, anything really that have to do with planning and zoning and state statute can be found in RSA 672 to 679. And again, there's a link here which folks can click on. It's also or in the PDF version of the slides. So now kind of again a little bit more detail. So after the grant of power in RSA 674:16 is kind of what the more detailed written out purpose of what zoning is in RSA 674:17, which really kind of spells out the intent and purpose of zoning ordinances. So zoning shall be designed to lessen congestion in the streets, to sorry, my slide has gotten small on me here. Teams issue to secure safety from fire, panic, and other dangers, to promote health and the general welfare, to provide adequate light and air. And I'm not going to keep reading for the sake of time, but there's several kind of sub letters within 674:17, and I don't actually think this is the entire 674:17. The purpose of zoning that was, I don't think I included on the slide, it was actually even amended last year in 2024. Folks may remember that the legislator passed a law. I want to say House Bill 1569, which amended kind of zoning allowances for home-based childcares, and that also actually, as part of that bill, tweaked part of RSA 674:17, for example. So the purpose of the zoning ordinance statute 674:17 does get amended sometimes every few years. New Hampshire did have a challenge to the constitutionality of zoning in 1928, 1 year after Manchester adopted zoning. It was challenged and heard in front of the New Hampshire Supreme Court in Sundin versus Rogers. And in that case, uh, the plaintiffs argued that zoning is an unconstitutional infringement upon property rights and viewed as a taking. The New Hampshire Supreme Court vehemently disagreed, and in their decision cited and upheld the U.S. Supreme Court's Euclid decision, which Brendan mentioned earlier, from 1926, that stated that the principle and practice of separating land uses into zones, aka zoning, um, is legal and has a valid government interest and exercise in order to further the overall health and well-being of the community. The New Hampshire Supreme Court ruled in part in the Sundin decision that these general terms have already been held to include such regulations to promote the public health, safety, or morale, the comfort of the community, or the protection of property. So now I've kind of gone over the kind of basic statutes of what gives municipalities zoning powers. This slide is showing you that 226 jurisdictions throughout the state have adopted zoning authority under RSA 674-16. This includes 216 of the 234 municipalities in the state, as well as 10 village districts, which the legislature has given zoning authority to in New Hampshire, which are, for those folks not familiar, are sub-municipal districts. There are currently 18 municipalities that do not have a comprehensive zoning ordinance. You will see in this map, which I don't know if folks can see my cursor or not, but most of the communities that do not have zoning are in the northern part of the state. The communities in orange, if I'm reading the map correctly, are the 23 unincorporated places in Coas County, which are governed by the Coas County Planning Board has zoning authority over those 23 unincorporated places. The purples on the map are communities that only have a floodplain development ordinance. I'm sorry, I'm getting my colors wrong here, folks. I'm trying to read the legend very small. Those are the blues on the map. The purples are the actual, and the purples and grays are variations of non-zoning communities or communities that don't have zoning but may have a telecommunications ordinance. My apologies for not spelling that out correctly. And then there's 13 of the 18 communities in New Hampshire that have not adopted zoning. Do have some type of other, while they say they don't have a kind of comprehensive zoning ordinance, may have a floodplain development ordinance because they're members of the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP program, and or a telecommunications ordinance, or in some cases, even while they don't call it a zoning ordinance, may have a standalone setback or height ordinance. So now some background on kind of the structure of different types of land use boards as laid out in the statutes. So RSA 672:7 defines a local land use board as a planning board, historic district commission, inspector of buildings, Building Code Board of Appeals, Zoning Board of Adjustment, or other board or commission authorized under RSA 673 established by a local legislative body. For the focus of this webinar today, we're just going to focus on kind of the responsibilities for planning and zoning boards, but we have included here the kind of statutes if you want more information about some of the other land use boards, including historic district commissions, the inspector of buildings, building inspectors, Building Code Board of Appeals, as well as other kind of land use boards that are referenced in statute, encourage heritage commissions, agricultural commissions, housing commissions. I do want to point out before we start going into the weeds on responsibilities of planning boards and zoning boards, conservation commissions, or often referenced as CONCOMs, are actually not considered a local land use board as defined in RSA 672:7. They're actually governed by RSA 36-A. So now I'm going to talk a little bit overview of kind of the land use regulations and process. Um, Brendan touched on it a little bit, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail now. So, a community can create a planning board through RSA 673:1 in the form of a warrant article to be voted on by the legislative body, which is either for most communities, the legislative body is going to be town meeting, whether you're an SB2 town or not. For communities, charter towns, the a dozen or so communities that have charters, and the legislative body is the town council. And then in our 11 cities in New Hampshire, they have city councils, and the city council is the legislative body that will be voting on that warrant article to formally create a planning board. After the planning board is established, then the election of officers must be completed. After elections, and the bylaws or rules of procedure are created. The bylaws or rules of procedure should spell out the order of business in which the board operates, explain the roles and purpose of board's officers, when the board meets, roles of alternate members, process for recusals. I'm not going to go into all the details, but kind of lay out the kind of rules of procedure for how the planning boards should operate. After the bylaws or rules of procedure are approved by the board, they are put on file with the city or town clerk. And then once the officers and bylaws are in place, then the planning board can begin work on creation and adoption of the master plan. The master plan, for those as detailed in RSA 674:2, is not considered a land use regulation, though, but it is required to be adopted in order to adopt zoning and other land use regulations. A master plan provides the legal standing for the community and planning board to adopt and implement zoning and land use regulations. A master plan, like land use regulations, is community based, meaning the community or members, residents of the community have shared their ideas and desires for how they want their community to grow and where they want to see development happen and what types of development the community wants. Importantly, New Hampshire differs from some of our neighboring states in that the Master Planning Statute 674:2 only requires a community to actually adopt and include two sections or chapters in the master plan: the vision section and the land use section or chapter. Um, the statute, as folks know, includes a ever-growing list of other optional sections which a community may adopt, but they are all optional. Those include things like recreation, conservation, natural resources, housing, economic development, community facilities, energy, transportation, so on. And then after the planning board adopts the master plan, they can begin work on creating any or all of the following: the capital improvement plan, or SIP, or the zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations. I'm not going to go into more detail. This chart kind of shows the relationship between the master plan and the land use regulations, where you can't have one without the other. I guess the important thing that one thing I will say here is that, or just point out, is that if you have a zoning ordinance, you also have to have a zoning board of adjustment, which we will get into in a minute, which is kind of that relief appeal body safety valve for appeals from the zoning ordinance. If you want to be able to charge and adopt and charge impact fees, you need an adopted capital improvement program, a CIP. And if you want to be able to subject non-residential projects and multifamily project development applications to site plan review, and in order to adopt site plan review regulations, you first also have to have adopted subdivision regulations as well. We've gone over a lot of content, so we're not, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going through the slides. We're doing okay on time, but if folks do have questions, please, I encourage you to please put them in the chat. So now we're going to talk a little bit about planning boards, different regulatory functions. The planning board has two main functions, which are regulatory and non-regulatory, but both are kind of different responsibilities. The most important regulatory functions is the creation, adoption, and updating of the master plan, as I just discussed, as laid out in RSA 674, colon 2 through 4. The purpose of the master plan, as I discussed on the previous slide, is to set down as clearly as possible the best and most appropriate uses and location for future development. To aid the planning board in designing ordinances to result in preserving and enhancing the unique quality of life in a municipality. And while the master plan, again, unlike some of our neighboring states, is not a legally enforceable document in New Hampshire, it is the legal basis, or as the RSA puts it, the legal standing for the community and the planning board to draft, adopt, and implement zoning ordinances and other land use ordinances. And it will say, kind of, folks have probably heard us, if you've heard the other webinars, while it's not really explicitly stated in statute, it's a best practice that anything in your zoning ordinances is generally supported by the master plan and consistent with what is stated in your community's master plan. The zoning ordinance, again, as stated in that grant of power in 674-16, is the rule book for your community and the planning board. The planning board is in charge of proposing amendments to the zoning ordinance. Zoning amendments should support and keep the goals and objectives of the master plan at the forefront of the planning and development community, like I just said. We've done previous webinars on kind of the process for adopting zoning amendments and kind of best practices for putting zoning amendment articles on the ballot. So I'm not going to go through that in detail at the moment, but if you go to that planned webinar page, link at the beginning that I talked about, you'll see a webinar, I think it was last July, where I talked about, the whole webinar was all about best practices for zoning amendments. The subdivision regulations, as detailed in RSA 674-36, and I think that is a typo in this slide. It should say RSA 674-37. It must be consistent with the goals of the master plan in order to prevent scattered and premature development and to address the proper coordination and layout of street services, utilities, layout of streets, utilities, health, and open space. The site plan review regulations, as detailed in RSA 674-43, and the power to subject projects applications to site plan review applies to non-residential and multifamily housing developments, as I said, including change of use applications and condominiums, but only in municipalities, as I said earlier, that adopt a zoning ordinance as well as subdivision regulations under 674:43 have the authority to adopt site plan review regulations. You also must have adopted a zoning ordinance. CIP, or capital improvement programs, as detailed in 674:5 through 8, is a planning and budgeting tool used by municipalities for the financing and purchase of municipal expenses over an extended period of time. The legislative body votes on a warrant article to authorize the adoption, creation, and amendment of a capital improvement program according to RSA 674:5. The creation, maintenance, and amendments to the CIP then lies with the planning board or a CIP committee. I do want to kind of point out here, CIP is a great tool. The CIP program itself, the board does not appropriate money in itself. The municipality still has to put a warrant article to be voted on by the legislative body actually funding the CIP. And then RSA 674:22 is the growth management statute, which gives the legislative body the power to regulate and control the timing of development. Again, you must have both adopted a master plan and a CIP to enact a growth management ordinance. And the growth management ordinance shall be based upon growth management to balance both community development and regional development needs. This has to be demonstrated and their need in order to regulate development and kind of have a legally valid growth management ordinance. Talked a little bit about impact fees as authorized under the Innovative Land Use Control Statute earlier, so I'm not going to go through that again in the interest of time, but again, it's really subjecting development, including subdivision, building, construction, or other land use change to certain fees based on what impact they're going to have on the community. And then Excavation authority for regulating excavations. A little bit different than other land uses is laid out in RSA 155E. The planning board is the regulator for the majority of municipalities for excavation. They are in charge of drafting, adopting, and amending excavation permits and enforcement of excavation sites. And then the authority to regulate driveways is included in a different section of statutes. Is in RSA 236.13, which has to do with, for those familiar with, if we have any road agents on the call, or really kind of where also statutes talk about the different classification of roads of class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, class up to class 6 roads. And 236.13, par number 6, Roman numeral number 6, identifies the planning board as the body to retain jurisdiction over the adequacy and safety of every existing driveway, entrance, exit, and approach to a highway. They have to adopt regulations and can delegate permitting and enforcement to the highway department, road agent, governing body, or other qualified official or body. As I just alluded to, class 6 roads. There's a limit on building permit issuance on class 6 roads and private roads, on as detailed in 674.41. Governing body has to authorize building permits on class 6 roads, and the planning board also has authority to review and comment on building permits being issued on class 6 roads. Now I'm going to move on very quickly to the non-regulatory functions of the planning board. I do want to say, folks, I've realized, again, I knew we had a lot of content to get through. There's going to be the entire May 10th, our entire May 10th conference is going to go into the roles and responsibilities of planning boards and zoning boards in a lot greater detail than I'm going to go through right now in the next couple slides. So if you want a deeper dive, that is, again, our May 10th conference is going to provide a lot more deeper dive on that. But again, the non-regulatory functions of a planning board are include site plan and subjecting applications to site subdivision and site plan application processes. Again, as we said, you have to obviously, community has to have adopted subdivision and site plan regulations to subject to those processes. The statutory procedures to be followed are in 674.36 for subdivision and 43 for site plan. And again, it includes kind of the normal process of public notice. You hold a public hearing after the planning board has ruled the application complete. The planning board votes, so on. We're not going to go through the whole process right now on adopting subdivision and site plan regulations. Again, that'll all be covered in more detail on the May 10th conference. And then excavation regulations, applications, permits are handled the same way as subdivision and site plan regulations, applications and public hearings. And then, like I said, reviewing and approving site plan, subdivision, excavation applications are the main non-regulatory functions for a planning board. Now I'm going to move quickly on to kind of the overall roles and responsibilities of a zoning board of adjustment, or ZBA, also just referred to in the statutes as the Board of Adjustment. Again, please put your questions in the chat if there are any. The ZBA, or Zoning Board of Adjustment, has fewer functions than the Planning Board as far as regulatory and non-regulatory responsibilities, but primarily the purpose of the ZBA is to provide relief from regulations, also known as the safety valve to prevent the indirect taking of private property for public use without just compensation. According to RSA 674:33, the ZBA is responsible for appeal of administrative decisions from the RSA. Including to hear and decide appeals if it is alleged there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by an administrative official in the enforcement of any zoning ordinance, which includes the building inspector or the planning official's decision. The ZBA also has the power to hear variance appeals, which include the author, which the statute says in 674:33, authorize upon appeal and specific cases a variance from the terms of the ordinance. So anytime an applicant wants to do something that the zoning ordinance does not state they can do, or expressly prohibits, you have to go to the ZBA. You have to get turned down by the planning board or the administrative officer, and then appeal to the ZBA for relief through a variance to be able to do that kind of do that use, go forward with that use, or whatever other relief you're seeking. I'm seeing a comment about slides not advancing. We are currently should be on slide number 36 for folks. If anybody else having that problem, please put that in the chat. A few other lesser known powers of ZBAs include special exceptions. I'm not going to read kind of in detail what the statute verbiage from 674-33, but in short, the special exception may provide that the ZBA, in appropriate cases and subject to appropriate conditions and safeguards, make special exceptions to the terms of the ordinance. All special exceptions are to be made in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance and shall be in accordance with general or specific rules contained in the ordinance. Generally, it is use allowed in a zone, but needs additional review. And in kind of practice point, I just want to point out there's a difference between a special exception review by the zoning board of adjustment and a site plan review, which is by the planning board. The special exception review is held to specific standards in the zoning ordinance that the ZBA should address, whereas the site plan review is based on the site plan review regulations under the purview of the planning board. And in the last two kind of appeals or applications that a zoning board of adjustment hears are equitable waivers when a lot or other division of land or structure is discovered to be in violation of physical layout. Or dimensional requirement imposed by a zoning ordinance. The ZBA shall, upon application by and with the burden of proof in the owner, grant an equitable waiver. And in the last kind of application, or thing to point out that a ZBA has is a request or motion for a rehearing, which the statute says an applicant or a butter can request a motion for rehearing within 30 days of a decision made by a ZBA, local decision body, or board of adjustment, or board of appeals in regard to its zoning. The selectmen, or any party to the action or proceedings, or any person directly affected, which I actually believe was not updated. It should say directly affected, including specifically the abutter, may apply for a rehearing in respect to any matter determined. So that's kind of the very, very high level overview of the roles and responsibilities of the ZBA. Again, this will be the subject of a day, both the planning board's responsibilities and zoning board responsibilities will be subject of the day-long planning board track and zoning board track on our May 10th conference. If you want additional details, just kind of some final points on the ZBA before I turn it back to Brendan for some wrap-up slides on best practices for planning board and zoning board members. The ZBA is known as a judicial body, or quasi-judicial body. They do not create legislation or regulations like the planning board. While they can and should work with the planning board on zoning amendments, they do not create or amend zoning ordinances or land use regulations. Further, the ZBA is not executive, it does not enforce its own decisions. This is left to the Board of Selectmen in towns, or the building inspector, code enforcement officer, a zoning enforcement officer, or designee that enforces their decisions. The ZBA, as I said, is a quasi-judicial body. In short, the ZBA interprets the ordinance and regulations and applies its interpretations to the applications or appeals before it. Finally, the ZBA is expected to decide on individual cases based on evidence and testimony before it and make a decision on a case-by-case basis. Both sides and the public are given an opportunity to provide testimony. ZBA, I'm not going to go through all this, decides its applications and appeals on the merits. Decisions are based on the facts and evidence and findings of facts, not emotion or opinion. The ZBA is charged with approving, denying, modifying, or imposing conditions. We recommend that you discuss with your town attorney about how board members' knowledge of the site or community can be used when making a decision. Your decisions are either to approve, deny, or modify, and may impose conditions on all decisions. Further, the burden of proof is on the applicant to make the case that relief from the zoning board of adjustment should be granted. The board should not be granting relief based on an applicant saying they have to spend more money or lose money if relief is not allowed. Again, that's the high-level overview. Please talk about this in more detail with your town attorney. I did see somebody just mention finances should not play a role in the decision. Thank you for pointing that out. And then please be clear when your decisions and reasons why you came to them. As folks may recall, there is several 4 or 5 years ago at this point, the statutes were amended to require findings of fact in all planning board and zoning board decisions, whether they are a approval or a denial. And then I will answer the question of master plans in 1 second. I just want to get through this. If your decision gets appealed and goes to the court, Superior Court judges and Supreme Court judges only have the paper trail from kind of the findings of fact. So that really needs to be clear in there. The minutes, deliberations, decisions, conditions all need to be clear. Again, check with your city or town attorney. There is some discussion about financing kind of being considered a kind of justice issue to prove hardship. I'm not going to go into details on that right now, but that'll be covered in more detail on our ZBA track as part of our May 10th conference. For the master plan statute, the best practices for master plans, I believe, somewhere in 674 2 through 4 to be updated every 5 to 10 years. I'm now going to turn it over very quickly to Brendan. Brendan, I think because it's already 1 o'clock, we're not going to go through every kind of, why don't we not go through all the different kind of slides on how to be a good board member, but just kind of, yeah, folks know that they can review those afterwards.
Okay.
Again, I think it's somewhat self-explanatory. Follow the 91A, don't have ex parte kind of communication, recuse yourself where appropriate. There's also kind of, again, there's a juror standard. I'm not going to go through this right now due to time. This will all be covered in greater detail on the May 10th conference. I did this very quickly. Or Brendan, why don't you go very quickly through kind of the acronyms and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, we can go through some of these pretty quickly. There's a lot of acronyms, a bit of alphabet soup in the planning world. So AICP is the American Institute of Certified Planners. ADU is one that we hear a lot in the last couple of years, accessory dwelling unit. APA is the American Planning Association. CIP, which Noah mentioned earlier, is Capital Improvement Program. CUP is Conditional Use Permit. DRI, Development of Regional Impact. ERZ, Economic Revitalization Zone.
Right.
Do you want me to go through the federal ones or these?
I want to just reference, yeah, just that for folks to look at that there's, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, most folks probably know most of these, EPA, FEMA, National Flood Insurance Program through FEMA, let's see, Federal Highway Administration, Stormwater Protection Plan for the state. We've got DES, Department of Environmental Services, DOT, Department of Transportation, DRA, Department of Revenue Administration. So then this is our kind of general information. If you have any general inquiries, this is where you can find us. You can go to our website, look for the staff contacts. We've got the whole library on YouTube. We've got a lot of links, a lot of resources, and of course you can always reach out to us. I believe the next slide. So this is Noah and myself. If you're curious about anything we talked about or need to go through more detail, again, we're already over our time limit. Yeah, and if there's go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, so we did just get that question again. Thank you. I tried to answer it verbally, but yes, the answer to how frequently a master plan needs to be updated is in 674 or 2. I'm just trying to get it. It's 5 to 10 years, and it's more of a recommendation. And just so folks know, there's nobody that actually is verifying master plans in the state. So while the statute says 675.9 says you have to send your updated master plan or updated master plan chapters to OPD, there's nobody that's actually going to that's kind of where it ends. Obviously, the more frequently a community can update their master plan, the better. We are past time, as I said. I do want to be respectful of folks' time. I realize we covered a lot of information. I believe my colleague Alvina has put in, and I'm just going to pull up the questions to make sure I didn't miss any real quick for folks that might have a few minutes. Send me out a follow-up email. We will, as I said, we encourage you, if you have not already, to please sign up for our May 10th conference. And it looks like I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat right now. Again, hopefully this was a good primer for new planning board members. Again, if you have any questions, as Brendan said, please feel free to reach out to Brendan and I or to emails or phone numbers shown on that slide, or really any, as I said earlier, you can also just, in a slide, I think on the previous slide, feel free to also email just planning@livefree.nh.gov, and one of us, either Brendan and I or somebody else at OPD, will do our best to kind of get back to you. We try for kind of a 48-hour response. And we thank you and hope you have a great afternoon.